I want to welcome you to the Waypoint55 webinar. And we have a webinar every month in the evening so that people, whether they're on staff or lay leaders in the church, can be better equipped in your particular area of ministry, whether that's first impressions, security, children's, youth, missions, prayer teams. Elders are our best attended webinars typically as well, because there's so little resourcing out there for elders to be better equipped to do their role, to serve in their role. So we've got playlists on our YouTube channel that I was just talking about, that you can go to Waypoint Church Partners on YouTube and find all 40 of our webinars that we've done to date. And you can find particular playlists for whatever ministry area you happen to serve in. So we're thankful for Mid-Atlantic Christian University, who's been our ministry partner from the very beginning, that serves as the sponsor of our webinar platform, and they're great regional partners here in the Mid-Atlantic to serve churches and equip leaders in the region. So we're thankful for them and what they do for us. If you haven't been to one of our webinars before, I do want to let you know that there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so if you have a question during our webinar tonight, as soon as you think of the question, go ahead and type it in, and it gets put in a queue over on the side of our screen that we can see, so that we know between topics or at the end, we don't have to get them live. We can put them in order and try to answer them. And if we don't get to answer your question live tonight, we do get a report as soon as the webinar is over of all the questions and who sent them, so that we can try and answer your questions after the fact. So if you got a question about short-term mission trips, logistics, or any other questions, please type those in as soon as you think of them, so that they're there in the list for us to try and answer for you. And that's our goal tonight. We're talking about do's and don'ts for effective mission trips tonight. And twice a year, we try and do topics that are helpful for the missions-oriented people in your church. And it's kind of a new phenomenon in my experience for churches going on short-term mission trips. When I was a little kid, which has been years ago, short-term mission trips were not a thing. And so we have kind of been learning as we go over the last three decades on how to do those well. I've had the good fortune of being part of a number of mission trips over the years. I went back and counted them up, and I think I've been on 16 trips in the last 33 years. So about one every other year. And so I'm still learning how to do that, but we've invited someone that's been involved in one way or another with far more than that. Brad Warren is the Engage Director at CIY, Christ in Youth in Joplin, Missouri. And we invited them because they do a number of trips, and the people that I know that have been on trips with CIY have told me how well that they've been done, how well they've been organized and put together. And so we invited Brad to come onto our webinar tonight and to share some of the do's and don'ts. And then I'm hoping to fill in any kind of probably lessons learned the hard way on my end that I could share as well, on how you could do a great mission trip or mission trips from your church. And so I'm curious, Brad, welcome. We want to welcome you tonight, number one. But if you would get us started by just telling us the story of CIY being involved in mission trips. When I was going to CIY as a teenager, it was just summer conferences. And so now the scope of the ministry of CIY is so much larger, and particularly with mission trips. If you tell us the story of how those got started, and then maybe even not just how long you've been doing and how many you're going to do here this year, Lord willing, but also kind of all the different kinds of places that you've been doing trips. I'd be very curious of that. So welcome, Brad, for joining us tonight. And tell us about mission trips with CIY.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thanks for having me. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm grateful that Waypoint is taking the time and effort to educate the people that rely on them for resourcing about missions and international missions and short-term international mission trips, because I do think that they play a really important part in the local church and opening people's eyes to what God is doing all around the world. So appreciate you guys at Waypoint and appreciate you having me. CIY as a ministry has been around for over 50 years now. And, as you said, has basically started off doing high school summer conferences and a winter conference that I like to talk about because of how bad of a pun the name is. they did a winter conference and called it Ski IY, which is not the way that you would ever brand anything anymore, but or maybe it is, I don't know, but that's what we called it. So once we were done, once we had done those two things for several years, CIY moved into this area of short-term international mission trips. That happened in the late 1980s. CIY put together a team of pastors and youth pastors and took our first trip down to Haiti in the late 1980s. And for over 30 years, we've taken trips every single year. We even got one in this year under the wire before things shut down due to COVID. So every year we take somewhere between 15 and 20 trips. We have 15 on the calendar for 2021 and are really hoping that we're able to make those trips happen, depending on how things unfold in the next several months. But we take trips all over the world, and each of our trips has a completely different flavor depending on where in the world you're going and who the mission partner is that we're serving alongside of. So we take a lot of trips to Northern Ireland every year and serve with several different mission partners there. We have mission partners in Honduras and the Dominican Republic and Ecuador that we see every year, all the way clear around to Cambodia, where we take trips every year and have for a very long time. And lots of places in between: Kenya, Poland. We have mission partners in Romania and Chile and all over the world, which is a really exciting thing to see how God is working through kingdom workers in different places all around the world. So each of our trips has a little bit of a different flavor, and that's something that I think is unique and kind of cool about CIY Engage. So that's kind of what we do, and would love for you guys to continue to partner with us in prayer that we're able to continue to do that in what I hope is a very rapidly approaching post-COVID world.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. We had a gal from our church where we currently attend that was supposed to go on a trip with CIY this summer. She sent us the support letter and we
Mhm.
sent some money. So I'm hoping she's banking the money and going to go this next summer.
Yeah.
But I know that she and we were all disappointed that she wasn't able to go. But that's a lot of wisdom that you can bring to the table if you're administrating 15 to 20 trips a year, as far as lessons learned on how to try and do that well, or at least avoid some mistakes that some groups would make. And so I'm curious, just to dive in as we're getting started, what are some of the don'ts, maybe if we started on that and then get into the positive do's at the end? What are some of the things that you've seen that we shouldn't be doing as we're planning and executing mission trips, from your perspective and the wisdom that you've had leading through these trips through CIY?
Yeah, I'm gonna share three. I'm gonna share three of my don'ts. And before I get into them, I want to say to everyone watching this that each and every one of these is a lesson that I have had to learn from my own experiences. So as I go through some of these things that are items that we might want to avoid on short-term international mission trips, I hope you don't hear me talking down to you, or if you're someone that maybe you feel like, oh gosh, I've done that before. I've made that mistake in the past. You're in good company. I've made it too. And I would bet that maybe Tim has, and maybe he'll have a couple stories to share along with us. These are all things that we learn as we go. Nobody's perfect. So I do want to dive into some of these lessons that I've had to learn the hard way, knowing or hoping that you guys can learn from my mistakes and maybe not repeat some of these things. So the first don't that I want to share with you when it comes to going on or leading an international mission trip is not to try to do it alone. And this one is more relevant to somebody who would be leading a trip, but is also pertinent to somebody who's just attending a short-term international mission trip. But the title of trip leader, that can come with a lot of weight, and people, you might be taking a team of 20 people or 50 people somewhere that they've never been in the world, and they're going to have a billion questions, right? And be asking about exchanging money, and whether they have toilets in the country you're going to, and if there are any words that in the language of the place that you're going, and how you're getting there, and are you going to be safe, and who's going to be driving you around, and you know you're going to be relied on to answer a lot of those questions, and that can be kind of a lonely feeling. At CIY, we actually, on each of our trips, we have two trip leaders on all of our trips, and on a trip that I led, I was actually teaming up with a guy who he he might not have been quite prepared for what we were going to undertake, and we were in Cambodia, and he was leading a team of his high school students, and I was there just to kind of make sure that everything went smoothly, and we were walking into an area that was facilitated by our mission partner, and I was the first one off the bus because I knew where we were going, and went to the place that we were headed, and turned around and immediately started counting people as they were entering, and I knew there were supposed to be 16 people, including myself and my fellow trip leader. So I counted myself, counted everyone that came along, got to 15, and my co-leader had not come down the alley. And so I just assumed, well, he's okay. He knows what he's doing. He's been here before, and kind of, said he'll show up and it'll be fine. Uh, I later found out that he had seen a Rafa staff member approaching. Rafa, I'm sorry, Rafa is our mission partner that we support in Cambodia. He'd seen a Rafa staff member approaching and had asked if he could drove their moto around the block and wrecked it, which, if you're ever leading a short-term international mission trip, is maybe something else that you shouldn't do. But that was a lonely feeling for me, because I immediately thought, okay, I have to lead this trip by myself. But there are so many people that you can rely on a short-term international mission trip. And I would say, first and foremost, lean heavily on the people who live and serve in the country that you are going to. It's totally okay if someone asks you a question to say, I don't know, but this is my friend Tara. She lives here in Cambodia, and she definitely would know the answer to the question that you're asking. So don't try to go and do these things alone. It's totally okay to say, I don't know. I don't pretend to be an expert in all the different places that we go. To use the example that I've been talking about, when we go to Cambodia, we partner with an organization that rehabilitates victims of human trafficking. And I don't know what it's like to counsel a young girl through that trauma. I am not the expert on nearly anything that we do there. I'm just there to make sure that everybody has a good experience and help facilitate some of the logistics so that Rafa and the students can have a great connection point. So for me to be able to pass that off and say, hey, I don't know, but my friends here that live in Cambodia, they do, is a great thing. So don't feel like you have to do this alone. Even if it feels lonely, it's probably not. So definitely identify those people that you can rely on to be a good source of information and even a good logistical support to you, so that you don't feel all that weight on your shoulders. So that's the first one. Do you have anything to add to that, Tim?
Well, I do, but I want to remind people to go ahead and type in a question if you come up with any questions while we're talking, whether it's related to the topic or just a question you have about trips. We've had one good question already posed that we will get to. But if you've got a question, go ahead and hit the Q&A button and get that in the queue. But that was one of the lessons that I would say that was on my list, is don't forget to apprentice. If your church is going to continue to have trips next year and the year following, just like every area of the church, whether it's small group leaders or youth leaders, or you pick it, we need to be apprenticing for every area in the church, and that would include your short-term trip leaders. And so that if you pick someone that's been on a trip before but as a participant, then say, would you go on this trip, but not just only as a participant, but as an apprentice, so that you could lead maybe next year or the year following. And that way you've got a partner to help you with some of the logistics of any of the meetings you might have beforehand, or to split up tasks while you're on the field or things like that. And so very similar idea is have someone that you do the leadership role with, rather than feeling like all the responsibilities on your shoulders alone. So that's great wisdom from Brad. All right, Brad, number 2.
All right, so my second one is much shorter, and it's a very super practical thing. On engaged trips, we do not let our participants use the word weird ever at all. And I'll get into the reason for that in a second. But first, I want you to think of how many times that word might come up on a mission trip. From you're sitting down to your first dinner in Kenya, and they serve something called green grams, which you've never heard of, being an American. You would be in a situation that I found myself in before, and a kid takes a bite of that lentil dish that is completely unfamiliar to us, and the first thing out of their mouth is, that tastes weird. Or if you're on a road trip in a place like Cambodia, and you have to stop along the way and use the restrooms, and they're in outbuildings, and there's no toilets in the outbuildings. They're squatty potties, and a student might say, "Oh, that's so weird that we have to use the restroom in that way." And there's a billion different times that word tends to come up, and as Americans, we tend to use that word as a little bit of a crutch. But we try to really reinforce in students that those things are not weird. They're not weird. They're different, right? And that's okay to say. We say they're different all the time, and to sit down at a meal and say, "Well, this is completely different than anything I've ever eaten before," is not an offensive thing to say. Or to say, "Well, they have a different way of even using the restroom than we do," is not an offensive thing to say. But just because something is out of the norm or something is different from the way that you're used to experiencing it does not make it worse than the thing that you're used to experiencing, right? And it doesn't make your thing normal and their thing weird. So we try to avoid that language, and that's really symptomatic of a larger principle at Engage that we talk about, which is observation before interpretation. We try to teach our teams and reinforce in our teams that, hey, it's okay to make observations. It's okay to say, this is a food that we don't eat in the United States. It's okay to say, it's difficult for me to understand their accent because it's different than what I'm used to hearing. But to make an interpretation about those observations and to say, my way of doing things is right and their way of doing things is weird or is wrong, is a little bit of a narrow-minded view of this kingdom that we all live in and that we all call home, right? Because the ways that Christian in a place like Poland or Kenya worships, or a place like Ecuador worships, they are different than the ways that we might worship here in the United States in some ways, but they substantively are no different, right? We all worship the same God. We're all created in His image. So we really try to reinforce in our teams, hey, your way is your way, and their way is their way on some things, and that's okay. It's just something that's different. So we try not to let them use words like weird or make judgments about the culture that we're engaging in on any particular trip, as a way to really build dignity and worth into the people and the culture that we are experiencing and serving alongside of. So that's my second one, Tim. Do you have anything to tack on to that?
Well, a segue from it, yes. And again, if you've got any questions, go ahead and type those in. But the first trip that I ever went on was not a 1-week trip. It was a 10-week trip when I was in college during the summer. And so we went to week-long pre-field orientation. And one of the things that we had to repeat out loud every day was, it's not wrong, it's just different. And then our team, we had 10 people on our team that was helping to start a church in another country. Our team would often look at each other and go, it's not wrong, it's just different. And even now, 30 years later, I think of that on every trip that I go to, because you think that our way is the right way because that's the way we do it. And it's not the right way, it's just our way. And so that's really key to teach people that. But for me, the segue of that is I was taught that in some pre-field training. And so that's the thing that I would say is, not only don't neglect apprenticing, but don't neglect pre-trip training.
Mm-hmm.
And to have a couple of sessions where you get everybody in a room, and part of it that's really good so that you learn who everybody is, and you do some relational stuff and how long you've been at the church, and whatever you need to do for team building that gets you going on the trip. You're not starting from scratch when you're headed on the bus or on the plane or whatever. But also on that pre-field training, you can talk about speaking louder doesn't necessarily help. Slower and louder in English doesn't help, and all kind of cross-cultural things that there's people that have been on trips can share their experiences about, don't forget this, and don't forget this about how you handle your money, or how you uh, stay safe and all those kind of things can be handled in a couple of pre-trip training sessions. My key or my key thing that I would tell you is advertise the dates for your training when you advertise the trip. That if you're going to be part of this trip, you need to know that the training dates are going to be on this day and this day. That way, once they're on the trip, then you say, oh, we're going to train on this day. The people go, oh, I can't come to the training. And then they're not part of the team bonding and they're missing that training. And so if they're buying into that trip on their calendar, they're also buying into the days that the training is going to be. And you're not trying to herd cats to figure out when everybody can come to a meeting, because there's no way everybody's going to be able to come to a meeting that's not already on the schedule. And so don't neglect your pre-filled training and advertise the dates of the trip is on June 9th, but our training is May whatever and April whatever. And that's part of the deal. And so that's what I would say there is train good stuff like Brad was talking about making observations rather than judgments. That's huge. But that happens in your training sessions that you happen before you go. That's great stuff. So observation, someone asked, TJ asked observation before, was it judgment or something else?
Interpretation, but I mean,
Interpretation, same thing.
judgments works.
Observation before interpretation.
Yeah.
So that's TJ from Area 10 was asking that. That's good. That's good stuff because, particularly, and this is, are yours all high school kids, Brad, or you do junior high trips?
High school and college students.
Okay, college students, but anybody can fall prey to this, but immature people, but typically junior high or high school kids may not have the filters to quickly filter what they're saying coming out of their mouth unless they're trained well. And hopefully your adults have a little bit more self-control to go, ooh, that's weird. But there's no guarantees that age has anything to do with maturity. But teenagers have to be trained. This is going to be different. And that's okay. It's going to be cool that it's different. And it's not wrong. It's just different. But so you have to teach them that observation before interpretation. That's good stuff. All right, go ahead.
All right. So the last of the don'ts here is don't put yourself or the team on a pedestal. And this relates a little bit to that last point in the sense that when you're going somewhere else in the world and you're going onto somebody else's turf and you're serving alongside them and learning from one another, it's very, very important to make sure that you are not robbing the people that you are serving in another country of their dignity, right? They are people who are created in the image of God. They have value, they have worth, all their own that we don't bring to them, right? As a short-term international missions team. So there are very well-intentioned things that people say all the time. I don't want you to think that I haven't said these things. I'm speaking from my own mistakes, but we say well-intentioned things when we go on mission trips all the time. Like, well, I'm taking Jesus to the people of Ecuador, or I'm just going to go provide something for the people of Ecuador that they don't already have. And really, neither of those things is necessarily true, right? To say that you're taking Jesus somewhere, that insinuates that he's not already there, and he very much is, and he's probably been at work. He has been at work since the beginning of time in that place, and has already been at work through the people that you are going to be there serving alongside of. So it's really important to view short-term international mission trips not as I am going to do something for so-and-so, but as an opportunity for mutual serving alongside of brothers and sisters in another culture, or mutually learning from brothers and sisters in another culture. And anybody who's been on a mission trip before, which I would love to, just as a way to kind of get to know you while I'm talking through this point, if you could open the chat and just type the name of a place that you've been on a mission trip. I would love to know what some of the mission trips that you guys have been on are. But on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic, this is just one example. We had a team of high school students. They were from the Philadelphia area. And we were going down and we were helping. Our team was part of the process of installing a water filtration system in a small village. Now, uh, work had already been done on that water filtration system when we got there. Work continued on that water filtration system after we left. But um, there there was a man there, and we called him maestro, which in the Spanish culture is kind of like saying foreman of the job site, or something like that. And we worked with him. We did whatever he told us to do, and he was the expert on installing that water filtration system. Right? He didn't need us to come in and do that for him. He could have done it on his own. It might have taken a little bit longer, but we were able to come in and serve alongside him. We were able to learn from him, and we were able to be a blessing to him. Neither of those things is more important than the other, but the whole experience was a chance for each of us. Here's the real key, right? Is for Maestro to be able to point our team closer to Jesus, and for us to be able to do the same for Maestro, right? And we can both mutually do that on a mission trip. We can do it in a culture that's completely out of our comfort zone. We can do it in a place where we get to learn more about the image of God by experiencing people who are different than us. But it's something that we get to engage in together. It's something that we get to engage in with the people that we are serving and learning from, not something that we do for them. So that is my final don't, is don't put the team on the pedestal. The ground is level with everybody that you interact with, right? We're all created in the image of God. We're all gifted with talents and abilities and resources that are kind of unique to each of us. We all have the ability to be kingdom workers. That's not an America thing. It's not an our team thing. It's an everybody thing. So when you go, just that's a very important thing to remember, that you can learn too, right? You can learn from other people too, and you can be served too, and you can be blessed too on a mission trip. So make sure to just maintain that level ground, and not put the team on a pedestal. That's my last one there, Tim.
Yeah. Well, I would pair that with one of the thoughts that I had is don't underestimate your discipleship opportunities
Hmm.
uh, through this. Is that you're not just going to serve in this area, but this week for a lot of people is such a key event in their um, spiritual journey. It's a big deal. I've been on enough trips, and some of us have been on several trips, that it's another trip that we're going on. But for the person that's going on this trip, you can leverage this whole event, from the training beforehand to the trip and things that you might do afterwards, as a big discipleship moment. So strategize on how you can really leverage this event for discipleship things. For example, a lot of people will never actively journal as part of their spiritual disciplines, but you can say as a trip leader, we're going to journal every day for this trip for 7 days. You may have never journaled before. You never journaled afterward. You're going to journal your prayers every evening. And that's such a great spiritual exercise for people to do, maybe for the first time, that because you're the trip leader, you can say it's what we're doing. You can also have Bible reading or morning devotions, or split up devotions among everyone on the team. And for some people, it might be the first time they've ever shared a devotion among their peers, and they're nervous and shaken, but that's a big deal for them to share with the team for 5 minutes one morning after breakfast, or to have a series of scriptures that you memorize together, one per day for the 7 days you're on your trip. And all of a sudden, everyone on your team, I had one trip that this was done. I was not leading the group, but they had little laminated cards on a three ring, on a little ring. And so every day we learned a memory verse, but we could flip through them, and as we were memorizing them. And so everybody on the team, as we're flying home on the airplane, we were saying our memory verses to each other. And that has very little to do with the mission trip, although the memory verses were about what God's doing throughout the world. But it was a discipleship moment for a lot of people. They've never memorized a whole lot of scripture, if any, before. And so I would say, not only don't put your team on a pedestal, like we're bringing God to Indonesia. God's been in Indonesia a lot longer than we have, and we just get to go partner with his people and maybe introduce them to the God that's been there for a long time. But in the same way, don't underestimate how big of a strides people can make on their spiritual journey through this, even to the point where of course, in my role, I'm friends with lots of preachers. And so in the summertime, I see the trips that they go on Facebook. I think it's the coolest thing in the world to see people baptized on mission trips. And I'm sure that happens with CIY a lot with teenagers, but I've seen adults baptized in the the Black Sea in Ukraine that were on mission trips. They not Ukrainians, but Americans. I think that's the coolest thing that people this trip got them to that point in their faith journey. And so I would say don't underestimate the opportunities you have to really dive deep with the people that you've got in a way that they never may have before. All right. So if you got any questions, go ahead. The one Chris has asked, I know we're going to get to eventually in one way or another as we get into the do's, but we're going to switch now to here's some things that you should do rather than not do on your trips. Positive.
Yeah, before I jump into that, I just want to acknowledge some of these things in the comments because it's so encouraging to see. I mean, so many places that I've been, from the very first one, Port-au-Prince. I've been to Puerto Rico, Mexico, Kenya. We have mission partners in Poland and India, even though I have never been there. My best friend from college was a missionary in Indonesia. And that's a place that's very dear to his heart. Linnell, Rafa House, could not even describe to you the place that holds in my story. It's an incredible ministry, and I've loved every opportunity that I've had to go to Cambodia. So that's very cool that we have that in common. So it's just really encouraging to see all those things there. So jumping into the do's, the first one is, and Tim, that was a great segue actually into some of the things that I want to talk about in this do section. So I'm going to circle back around to several things that you said there for sure. But the first one here is own the moment. And what I mean when I say own the moment is be willing to be flexible. We have to empower our trip leaders all the time. We hand them a schedule and we say, this will change. It's not that it might change, right? And anyone who's been on a mission trip before might be laughing and nodding a little bit, but it's this will change. We have to learn to be able to be flexible and even let go of some of the things that we might think are really important in order to be able to experience a moment that God has for us on a trip like this. And a story that I like to tell is on a trip to Kenya, and Chris, having been there, I'm sure that this experience will invoke some images in your mind. But we were traveling around to some different slums and basically just getting to know some of the people that attended the church that we were there serving alongside of at a place called Jacaranda Community. And we were in the Kibera slum, which you really can't miss it if you go to Kenya. You can stand at places that look out over the slum, and it just goes on tin roofs for as far as you can see. Millions of people live in that slum, and we were going to go down and meet some people and spend some time in their homes and just talk with them and pray with them. And it's a very relational trip, which is something that I really love. And we were on our way down into Kibera, and our mission partners that we were with, we got to a certain point and there was a tent set up, and it was kind of a political rally that was happening. And there was something about that they just didn't really like. And it made them a little bit uncomfortable. And so we relied on their knowledge and their wisdom. And we said, okay, we're going to abandon this. We're not going to go in. And we turned around and we went back up the hill, and we went into a small building that was owned by the church, where we met with the pastor and some people from the church there. And as we were walking back up the hill, I remember thinking, man, I am so bummed, because that was an experience that I was just really looking forward to. And, I was praying that somehow we would still get to experience that. And we had to, in that moment, abandon what the plan was. But we went back up, we sat down in the church, we met with some people, and they immediately broke out into a song and started singing this song that was called Mambo Sawa Sawa, which means things are already better. And it's a Swahili gospel song. And you could tell that they were heartbroken that they had to turn around and that they weren't able to go and minister to the people in their congregation that day, and that they were sad for not being able to provide that experience for us. But we got to sit in that room and we got to sing praises to the Lord with them in that moment. And we got to hear from the pastor of the church, and we got to pray with him and for his congregation. And the Spirit really worked in that moment, that we would not have been able to share if things had gone according to plan. And that's a moment that really sticks out to me. And it's something that I really remember. And when I go back and I talk to people from that team, 3 years ago now, is something that still stands out in their memory and their recollection as just a really cool moment when we got to be the church along with our Kenyan brothers and sisters. So, um, you know, being able to be flexible and being able to go with the flow is not something that comes naturally to me. I am a scheduler, I am a logistics person, and I am a planner. And when things don't go according to plan, that's generally a moment of stress for me. But going back to that point about not trying to do things alone, relying on other people, relying on the people who know the country well, relying on the people that you are serving with, is something that might lead to changes in logistical things. And those things are okay. Be willing to own the moment, be willing to make those discipleship moments, like Tim was talking about, teaching moments, where you can really pour into your team, and open yourselves up to, if things had gone according to plan, you might have known what you were walking into. But now that things have changed and things are a little bit different, we all don't know what we're walking into together. And those are moments when the Spirit can really work in kind of neat ways. So definitely a huge do is be willing to be flexible, be willing to own the moment, and to take whatever God has for you in any given moment with your team, even if it's a moment that you weren't expecting.
Well, that's really good. And teaching everybody on the team to expect the unexpected. Don't be surprised.
100%.
Don't be surprised by surprises,
Mhm.
is the one phrase that I've heard on a trip. Uh, One thing, and I hadn't thought about this in my notes, but from what you were describing, I was on a trip one time, and it's the only time, it was the first time that I saw this, is we kind of had an evening debrief. It wasn't long, it was after dinner, maybe 30 minutes, but we would debrief from the day. Um, Actually, Brad, you live in Joplin, is that right?
That's correct.
I was on a team that came to Joplin after the
Okay.
tornado and
Mhm.
helped serve there. And we stayed in the dorm at Ozark, and we met there in the lobby after dinner, and we just talked about. And we had an egg, like a fake egg, but an acronym was the evidence of God's grace today,
Mhm.
EGG. Of what was it? Where did God show up today? And typically in a surprising way, in a way that we didn't plan. And so, I ran into this person at the gas station or whatever. And I was reminded through that often that I remember the first assignment I had in Bible college. On the first day of Bible college, I had a practical ministries class, and my professor had us read the book of Mark that night, and Mark with a little M every time ministry happened. And he had to circle it whenever it was an interruption in Jesus' schedule. And if you look through the book of, and I still have that Bible 30 years later that I went through that night, and almost every time Jesus did ministry, it circled, it was an interruption on his way to somewhere else.
Mhm.
And that's ministry and missions, is it's in the interruptions, and to be okay with that. And you think about all the people that interrupted Jesus, and he stopped and he dealt with the interruption in a good way. That's a great picture for a short-term mission trip to realize that. So that's really, really great stuff. The one thing I would say about that from my experience is a real logistic or a practical thing about that is add to your budget by 10%, or I've seen 5%. Whatever, if it's $1,000 trip, just add 10%, say it's $1,100 trip. Because if you go on enough trips, there'll be a trip where you miss your flight and you gotta get a different flight, or you gotta rent this bus for the day, or just something that you don't know is going to happen, and having the extra cash in your pocket as the leader to take care of the whole team is a whole lot different than scrambling about, now what are we going to do. And
Mhm.
so that's kind of planning for the unplanned thing to happen. And then the reverse of that is if nothing happens that requires that extra 10%, you can bless your missionary in a really practical, hands-on way with all that money. Don't plan on taking it home. It's just on the way out, say, hey, we want to give you this money to bless you and your ministry, do something special with it. My wife was on a trip a year ago that I was not on, but they took that, and the missionary couple that they went to serve, they bought them uh, gift certificates to nice restaurants in town because they knew that the 2 years that they'd been there, they hadn't been on a date because they were helping to start a church and get acclimated. And so rather than just giving them cash, they bought them really nice gift cards and said, "You must go on to dates, and we're going to ask you in a couple of months, where'd you go?" And for a couple of months they didn't go, and they kept asking them, "Where'd you go?" And finally they went on a date and said, "That's the best thing for us. We hadn't been on a date forever." And so they used that extra money that they had built into their budget to bless the missionaries in a real practical way. And but it was thinking about there might come up something that we were not planned for, so have some extra cash on hand just in case.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go through these last two a little quicker because I really would like to leave time for questions. Right now, it looks like we only have one in the queue. So, guys,
Chris,
I
we're
would
coming. We're going to
love,
get yours, Chris. Yeah.
we are going to get to it. I would love to have several questions there to answer. So, if you have any questions about going or leading mission trips, definitely type those in as they come to your mind. So, the second do here is do challenge your team to get out of their comfort zone. And this also circles back a little bit to what Tim was saying, but mission trips are not an opportunity for everyone to always be in their wheelhouse. Um, a lot of times we think of them that way. I've been on a mission trip to Mexico where we were going to build a house, and I think it would be really easy to stack that team with um, strong, athletic people who are able to meet the physical demands that building a house requires, and people who have experience in construction and all these different kinds of things. Really, I'm not sure that that's what a team should be. I think it should be full of people who have a heart to serve the Lord in a different way, and maybe learn a little bit about what it would look like to use their gifts and talents and abilities to be a better kingdom worker. So we bring them along, and we challenge them to be out of their comfort zone, and being willing as a leader to kind of push and prod at the right buttons at the right times to kind of guide people to this place um, where they don't feel safe in a good way. You don't want to like emotionally torment people, obviously, but
Mhm.
um, just being willing to kind of guide them or lead them or walk with them to a place where the Spirit might be taking them, so that they have a chance to encounter God in a way that they never have before, is a really, really important, I think, part of mission trips. And we one of our mission trips that we lead to a place called Riot, which is an acronym for revival in our town in Northern Ireland. We take kids and they go and they spend all week just building relationships with students at a youth center, middle school, high school, and college students, just like them. All they're doing is they're going and they're building relationships with these kids. And there's a little worship service each evening that's part of that youth center's programming. And during that worship time, Richie asks every single one of our students that we bring to stand up and to share what he calls a snack sized portion of their testimony. Just share something that God has done in your life. I was this way, then I met God, now I'm this way. Just a very, very digestible portion of their testimony. And everyone does it. Now, I want you to think about taking a group of high school and college students on a trip like this. Not everybody is going to be comfortable with public speaking. Not everybody is going to be super comfortable with processing their story. But our trip leaders are trained, and Richie, our mission partner there, has been doing this for a long time. Really guides the students through that experience of what it is like to share their testimony, and we make sure that every student has the opportunity to do that. Now, if they have to sit on it and they have to wait 4 days to build up the courage and really hone in on what it is that they want to say, that's fine. We will walk through that with them and help them to come to a place where they feel comfortable doing that. But um, it's out of some people's comfort zone, but we make sure that it's an experience that they have. And I think it's really important on a mission trip for every person to kind of have that feeling of, "Oh, this is something that I would not normally do, or wouldn't normally engage in." But it's a way for the spirit to teach me in this moment. It's a way for me to learn not only something that I'm going to be able to do in this moment, but something that I'm going to be able to take home with me that I didn't know before that I was really even able to or comfortable doing. So definitely make sure everybody gets out of their comfort zone at some point on a trip. Is my second kind of challenge.
Yeah, that's the best part of the trip, is the part that you hate, that when you come back, everybody
Yeah.
says that was the best thing for me, so that's good. Well, I want to get into, for one of my dues, but I wanted your answer, not mine. And that is, do have an application process. And so
Mhm.
I'm really curious, Brad, how you guys say no to applicants, and how you've learned to do that. Um, for me, one of the things I would say, which might be different from CIY trips, that's related to that, is do decide how many people this trip will take,
Mhm.
rather than just, we're going to take every applicant, everybody that comes up with their cash can go. And part of that is logistics for the local missionary, because they're going to have to do a lot of work for you to come. And so you got to think about how you're going to interrupt their ministry for you to come. And sometimes there's some tipping points for how, when the trip really changes. And by that I mean, how many people can they fit in a van? Because when you go from one van to two, that changes the logistics that the local arrangements person has to do. Or when you go from two vans to three, or
And the
from
cost of
two
the trip.
vans to a small bus, and if a bus holds 17, if there's 18 on your trip, now you're going to two vehicles, and that changes things. And so work with your people about that. But on the front end, you got to say, we are taking 9 people. All right. And that allows you then to filter out some people that probably aren't best suited to go on that trip. Sometimes it's physically that it's going to be a difficult, physically, to walk and hike to wherever you're going. And there's some people that are not physically able, and you've got to have a really difficult conversation with them to say, this trip is going to be too hard for you physically. And I've had to have that conversation with
Mhm.
a lady in my church. And then I empowered her to help us with the logistics of buying the supplies and packing all the suitcases that we were taking. And she went to Walmart and bought everything, so we were able to give her something to do. But I've been on the backside of that, where, Brad, I don't know if you could tell any stories of people I wish I had filtered out that I didn't, and it really hurt the whole team because they couldn't keep up with the trip. So I'm curious, how you do that as far as filtering out through your application process. And that's Chris's question: is
Yeah.
how do you filter people out through the application?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say for all of you that are tuning in from churches that I have a tremendous amount of empathy for how you have to deal with this because engage, quite frankly, I think it's a little bit easier for us because we send an email and tell somebody no, and then we never see them again. You know what I
That's right.
So, if you're a pastor at a church or if you're a trip leader and there's somebody that you just really don't think is suited for a trip, and you have to have that conversation with them, you show up to church the next Sunday and they're still sitting 2 pews in front of you, right? Just like every other week, and that situation becomes a little bit trickier. But so I'm going to try to speak from I do have a little bit of ministry experience. I'm going to try to speak from that perspective as well. Um, one of the things that I try to do, and Tim, you were spot on, you have to coordinate with your mission partners. And if they say 13, don't say, can we please bring 15? Because you're putting them in a spot where it's going to be more difficult for them to accommodate your team. And that's not the purpose of the trip, right? But when they give you a number, it actually is helpful to you, like Tim was saying, because you take applications, you set an application deadline. Now all of a sudden we have 18 people who could take 13 spots, and that really does help you weed out some of the people that you don't think are ready. But another thing that I always try to do is say no by saying yes. So I don't think that there's anybody in the world that is never going to be fit to go on a mission trip,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. So if there's somebody that's not there, they're not there yet. And as a pastor or a disciple maker, I think that there's a way that you can help a person get to a place where maybe in 2 years, when this trip comes back around on your church calendar, they would be in a place where they could attend a trip like this. And I think that when you say no to them, a lot of times there's a gentle way to say, hey, actually, we had to fill the spots up with some other people. And this trip is really demanding for this reason. And I would love to see you be able to attend the trip in 2 years. And here are the things that are going to be expected of you when that time does come around. And there's some really cool ways to do that. I think setting people who aren't ready to go on a trip up in mentoring relationships with people who are going on the trip is a really neat and empowering thing for both of those individuals. But being able to say, hey, the trip is full this year, would love for you to go in 2 years. Hey, would you be willing to meet and pray with this person about their time preparing for and debriefing from their trip, as a way to kind of like coach them through what it would look like for them to go on the trip? And then there are a billion things that are required to go on a mission trip that don't actually involve going on the mission trip, right? There are fundraisers, and there's budgeting, and there's informational meetings, and there's you know, storytelling when you come back from a trip. People need an outlet to share their stories, and involving those people in some of those things, I think, can be a really fruitful thing as well. I think I got around to answering that question. Did I, Tim?
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah,
That's the true answer. I think that Chris was hoping for an easier answer, but I think it's just hard to say,
it
we
is.
can only take this many people, and but sometimes you've got to be praying about discernment about who am I going to take a flyer on?
Yeah.
That this person doesn't seem right, but for some reason I think they got to go. And that can be discernment through prayer, that you don't take the most obvious 10, you take the most obvious 9, and then a flyer on someone that this might be that thing that really vaults them on their faith journey. And that's hard to discern. But by saying yes to them, you got to say no to somebody else that might be more obvious. And that's just hard.
And here's another thing about that is the trip is not going to go perfectly. So I don't think it's really fruitful for you, as somebody who's already made that decision, to say, gosh, I wish I hadn't brought person A and instead had brought person B. Um, because that's the team you have. And guess what? If you'd brought person B instead of person A, um, there would still be stuff to work through on the trip. It's not going to go perfectly smoothly. Everybody is not going to always get along all the time. Everybody is not always going to respond appropriately in every situation 100% of the time. So once you're on the trip, those are the people that the Lord has brought before you to lead through this experience. I don't think it bears a lot of fruit to look back and second guess yourself and question a lot of those things in different ways. But yeah, I mean, like you said, Chris, it's just it's just hard. There's no easy answer.
That's right. Well, our time is up. Brad, I want to thank you for the wisdom that you brought to us tonight, and want to encourage folks. There's going to be a follow-up email that comes out automatically tomorrow evening. And in that, I'm going to have Brad's email address. So if you've got any questions for him about logistics, for budgeting, or for visas and passports and how you help people with that, or the other parts of doing a mission trip, whether that's debriefing or things like that, you can ask him, or my email will be in there as well, and I can try and get you to a person that can answer your question well. I want to encourage you to do that. As we close tonight, I just want to let you know about our next couple of webinars that are coming up, and they may not be for you, but they might be for someone in your church that you need to let them know, hey, there's a webinar coming up that you'd be very interested in. You're our best advocate for our next set of webinars. Next month, we've got Bobby Harrington from the National Disciple Making Forum on how to really use online platform to disciple someone. And so he's got a great presentation on of all the methods that they're using, which one he thinks is the top model for that. And it's not, he wanted to share 3 of them, or I wanted him to share 3 different ones. And he said, no, I want to really teach one really well. So that's coming up next month. And then the month after that, in December, we've got a team here, a church here in our region that has created a really great plan for all the benevolence requests you get. 2 different kinds: the people that come from outside your church asking for help, and then the people that come from inside your church asking for help. How do you create a great policy that's a win for everybody for either one of those? And so both of those will be great, but they might be someone else in your church that's interested in attending those webinars. So when you see the email advertisement for that in a few weeks, if you would forward that email or share the Facebook post, we'd love for other people in your church to join our webinars coming up. Thanks for joining the webinar that we've had tonight. And we hope that the mission trips, Lord willing, that we have in 2021 are your best trips ever. Not just logistically smooth, but they're your best trips because people are impacted the most in their faith journey by going. So thanks, Brad, for your help presenting tonight. And we really pray God's blessing on your 15 trips in 2021 with teenagers and college age students, that it would be a big impact on the kingdom. All
Thank
right.
you.
So have a great night, everyone, and stay tuned for the email.